MS Now's Alex Tabbitt is on the ground in Minneapolis. He has been for days. Dave Ehrenberg and Lisa Rubin are back with me, and joining us now in this conversation, Paul Butler, a former federal prosecutor and Georgetown University law professor, and Charles Coleman, former Brooklyn prosecutor, also deals with civil rights prosecution. Both are now MS Now legal analysts. Alex, what's the latest here?
Well, this opening of this civil rights investigation that Deputy AG Todd Blanche announced just a few moments ago is something that people here on the ground have been clamoring for, Ariel, ever since the shooting and killing of Alex Preddy at around 9 a.m. local time on Saturday morning. Now, Blanche also made some other announcements. He said that thousands of law enforcement events happen every year when someone is shot, and that his DOJ does not investigate every one of those shootings, that the circumstances must warrant such an investigation. He also told reporters that DHS is also investigating and don't expect that investigation to stop. But it must be noted, Ariel, that here people do not trust the federal government. They are not necessarily hopeful that the DOJ or DHS is going to bring justice to the friends, the family, the community that is trying to still heal from the shooting and killing of Alex Preddy. So while it's a small win that there is a civil rights investigation, the people I talked to here say it is not enough, and they are not confident necessarily that this DOJ investigation will result in the justice that they are hoping for. Ariel?
Paul, are you surprised that we're now seeing a civil rights investigation into Alex Preddy's death? And what does an investigation look like from the DOJ at this point?
I'm more confused than surprised, because first we heard that the DOJ would not be using its experienced investigators to determine what happened to Mr. Preddy, and apparently now there's been a shift. It's unclear who is leading the investigation, and the Deputy Attorney General was kind of cagey about that at his press conference. And that's important, because if DHS is leading the investigation, first there's a problem with the police investigating themselves, which we know doesn't lead to good results. And the other issue with DHS leading or having a prominent role in the investigation is that they're not experienced at bringing criminal charges against law enforcement officers who've crossed the line when they've used deadly force. It's almost kind of like an HR investigation. So it's good news that the Department of Justice is investigating, but we also know that last week, at least five of its experienced career lawyers quit because their boss, who was the head of the Civil Rights Division of Justice, didn't allow them to do this investigation. So it's interesting that there's been this shift. I want to know why. Is it because of the politics? And if it's the politics, is this just a show? We know that high-level officials at DHS and the Department of Justice have come to a conclusion about both whether the people who killed Ms. Good and the people who killed Mr. Preddy are criminals or should be subject to a criminal investigation. They said early on they knew what happened. They didn't need no stinking investigation. Now apparently they've shifted. We'll have to see whether this is in good faith.
What should this investigation, Charles, look like if it is indeed in good faith? What kinds of steps would they need to go through to instill that measure of faith in the DOJ's process here?
Well, the first thing that has to happen, Ariel, is transparency. Transparency has to hallmark the investigation. And to Paul's point, the first point of transparency here is who exactly is conducting the investigation and who is a part of the conversation in terms of the materials that are being reviewed and who's actually being interviewed. DHS and, by extension, ICE has lost an incredible amount of credibility with respect to their ability to tell the truth. And so transparency in every phase of this investigation in terms of whose hands are touching it and who's supervising it is going to be the first key in terms of bridging that gap of trust that has now been broken with community. But I do want to go back to a critical point. When Renee Good was shot and killed in Minnesota, there was an immediate response from the DOJ saying that there would be no civil rights investigation. Harmeet Dillon immediately went out and said there's nothing to investigate. For anyone out there who is questioning the value of civil unrest and resistance, please do not be mistaken. The difference between what we're seeing now and what we saw then is the level of resistance and reaction that we've seen from the public to what happened with respect to Alex Preddy. It made the DOJ understand we can't sweep this under the rug and immediately declare no investigation. Now, the results of the investigation, of course, remain to be seen. But please understand that the protests in this matter have made a difference.
Were there circumstances, though, that would have made Good's death and Preddy's death different? That this would have warranted a civil rights investigation where hers would not?
Well, because of the fact that Harmeet Dillon made such an immediate declaration, we won't necessarily know. There are, of course, factual differences between the case, but to determine that there are no civil rights violations that even warrant an investigation in that short of a time, for me, as a civil rights attorney and as a former prosecutor, is troubling because you reach that conclusion without even gathering the information necessary in order to make a determination.
Lisa, talk to me about the local investigation or lack thereof. You know, normally under these circumstances, if something happens in a jurisdiction, you might see local investigators involved, local officials involved. They've been, without lack of better term, iced out.
No, they absolutely have been. And Ariel, it's even worse than what you just posited, because not only is it typical for local investigators to be involved, but here we know that Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is the agency in that state involved in all use of force incidents, showed up at the scene at 11:54 a.m., having obtained a search warrant from a Minnesota state judge. We can see the time and date stamp on it. At 11:54 a.m., a Minnesota state judge signed a search warrant so that they could go to the scene and participate in the collection of the sort of forensic evidence that any responsible investigator would want. And in that search warrant affidavit, they detail all the things that they wanted access to, and those include the firearms of both Alex Preddy and the agents involved in the shooting. They wanted access to the residue. They wanted access to everything that people were wearing during that incident. They wanted access to the phone, and they got none of it. And beyond that, my understanding is that the state of Minnesota still does not even know the names of the two officers who fired shots that made contact with Alex Preddy, one being a Customs and Border Patrol officer, the other being a Border Patrol agent. We know that based on some statements that the Department of Homeland Security has made, but we also know that until today, HSI, that's Homeland Security Investigations, the investigative side of ICE, was supposed to be the lead investigative agency. They said that in a federal court filing that was sworn and signed. And now Todd Blanche at today's press conference, putatively, mostly about Jeffrey Epstein, makes news and says, well, I can't tell you who the lead agency is, almost as if that doesn't matter, because what he is conceding is that there is now some Department of Justice investigation, and it involves, to some degree, attorneys from the Civil Rights Division, but he won't dimension the quality of that involvement. He won't tell you who is leading that investigation or even for what purpose. So there's some new information, but Mr. Blanche really refusing to put any meat on that bones today.
So, Dave, I want to ask you, is there any validity to the argument that could be made that you're not seeing a local investigation, you're not seeing local authorities involved because local officials have been reticent, if not entrenched in not cooperating with federal officials in this entire situation?
Well, the federal government is saying we're not giving you the evidence. I think the local officials are investigating. They set up an internet portal to get all the evidence, and I think that the ICE agent, the border control agent, at least in Preddy's case, will be indicted at the state level. I actually think this decision today helps the defense here because it's going to set up a situation where it's going to be harder for prosecutors at the state level to go to a federal judge and say, give us all the evidence because the feds are not even investigating. Because now they're saying, no, we are investigating. So they could run out the clock at the federal level. Even though there's no statute of limitations for murder, evidence spoils, memories fade, witnesses die. So I think it's actually a smart move politically and in the criminal justice system for the federal government to make this announcement today.
It's almost a plausible deniability thing. So, Charles, a critical part, we were talking about this in the break, of this case seems that it will center around all of the video that we've seen circulating. You had the video, of course, of Alex Preddy's killing. You had the video then that rose up into the public space of him allegedly kicking in the taillight of an ICE vehicle. How does all of that, the fact that we have this plethora of video, the fact that we probably may get body camera video, how does all that factor in?
Well, it factors in terms of the decision about whether you decide to put this in front of a grand jury and its totality in terms of bringing charges against whichever ICE officer or officers are responsible here. There isn't anything that I have seen nor heard, even in looking at this extended range of information that we have, that still warrants the use of deadly force. Does it warrant the use of perhaps escalated force? Perhaps, arguably. That may be a conversation. But when you get to the crossing the threshold into lethal force being used against Mr. Preddy, I still haven't seen anything yet that justifies that. But this is why you put this in front of the grand jury. It's more information for the prosecutors to make a decision as to whether to bring charges and then to bring that in front of the grand jury. And so that's how it factors in. Now, in terms of what happens after an indictment, if they secure an indictment, if a trial comes into play, and what the jury would see when we get there, there's a long, long road ahead as far as what that looks like. But for right now, if you're a prosecutor looking at that, and I'd love to certainly hear Dave's thoughts, but if you're a prosecutor looking at that and your office is considering that, this is what's going to make a difference as to whether you make a decision to bring whether you bring charges at all, what charges you bring, and then what does your grand jury presentation look like.